What if your place in society was determined by a government algorithm that scores you on everything you say and do and punishes you in real time for incorrect speech and behaviours? That would be just awful, wouldn't it?
Dock you 1 full ranking point as a punitive measure. This is a temporary measure.
No!
Well, China seems to think so too. And yet, this is the nightmarish image of China's social credit system that has been fed to us by the mainstream media. That's why today we're going to sort the facts from the FUD and figure out exactly what the social credit system is, what it isn't, and just how worried we should be about it. I'll start by saying that the most up-to-date, comprehensive and balanced information we could find on this topic comes from alumni of Germany's Mercator Institute for China Studies, aka MERICS. And in particular, we owe a lot to the work of Vincent Broussais, whose excellent 2023 book, Social Credit, The Warring States of China's Emerging Data Empire, we will link to in the description, along with a very interesting MERICS report. At the same time, we encourage you to take what follows with a grain of salt. That's because, as geopolitical tensions rise, Beijing is curating what information is disseminated more carefully than ever, while Western media is often rabidly anti-China. We should take a critical view of all the information presented to us and should never assume that we have the full picture. With that said, the social credit system is very much public-facing and nowhere near as opaque as, for example, China's defense research is. The system has been in development for around 25 years now, so we have plenty of material to chew on too. Let's dig in. Now, the social credit system in China is a mammoth topic. It's also a misnomer because there isn't one integrated system to speak of. Instead, social credit is a vague umbrella term that describes a fragmented assortment of policies and programs implemented by central and local governments in China. They all share the same underlying logic and purpose, however, which can be understood if we look at the problem that the government is trying to solve. According to Beijing, a lack of honesty, integrity, and the rule of law are holding back progress in economic and social life. As an example of what that means, people ignoring court orders was a recurring theme during our research. Problems like this make it difficult to do business because if suing and winning in court ultimately has no effect, then contracts lose their meaning. All you're left with is "trust me, bro," and this is not great when, say, you're a small company making a contract with a much larger one that could use you as a doormat if it wanted to. But the problems don't stop there. The government says that poor enforcement of existing laws and regulations has resulted in persistent problems of, quote, grave production safety accidents, food and drug security incidents, commercial swindles, production and sales of counterfeit products, tax evasion, fraudulent financial claims, academic impropriety, and other such phenomena that cannot be stopped in spite of repeated bans. The social credit system was introduced as an antidote to these wide-ranging problems, and as such, its scope extends quite far past the notion of market creditworthiness as commonly understood in other countries. And when it comes to describing a social credit system, Beijing has historically used language that is broad and vague rather than prescriptive. This is not a mistake, as policy flexibility is a high priority. Now, that sounds like Beijing giving itself carte blanche to exert its will over the Chinese people without limits, which is not very encouraging. However, you might be surprised to learn that the social credit system is highly fragmented and decentralized. Local governments have been given a lot of freedom to creatively interpret Beijing's unclear goals and implement whatever version of a social credit system they see fit. Because the social credit system is made up of so many disjointed and evolving parts, it's often easier to discuss what it isn't rather than what it is. So, We can start by looking at the most common misconception about this system and narrow down our understanding from there.
Alas, poor Yorick. I knew him, Horatio. A fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy, he hath borne me on his back 1,000 times. And yet, for all his vitality, he kneweth not of the Coin Bureau deals page. Where are your 60% discount on trading fees now? Your exchange sign-up bonuses of up to $60,000. Wherefore art thy discounts on hardware wallets too? If thou hadst only beheld the link in the description below, how thou wouldst have marvelled at these riches. Alas, poor Yorick. I knew him, Horatio.
So, the most common misconception about the social credit system is that everyone in China is given a social credit score by the government. This isn't true. There is no nationwide scoring system. Most of the many policies and initiatives under the social credit system don't involve any numerical scores. Those that do are all pilot programs designed and implemented by city governments. Now, these pilot cities were a major part of the social credit system's development in the 2010s, and many of them came and went over the last decade. They were sometimes mundane, sometimes ominous, and sometimes just weird. In every case, they were experimental though, as the social credit system is a work in progress that is far from complete. Now, city pilots were responsible for all of the most sinister headlines about China's social credit system that made their way into the English language media. You may have heard horror stories about local government proposals to deduct points from people for jaywalking, booking a hotel or restaurant and not showing up, playing loud music on the subway, and so on and so on. Not many of these punitive measures made it past the proposal stage, but the exceptions were chilling. The most notorious offender was the city of Rongcheng in the province of Shandong. This was the most intrusive example of social credit system implementation that we know of. Adam Knight, a PhD candidate at the University of Leiden who went to Rongcheng to study its social credit program, reported that businesses, public institutions, and individuals could be scored in 570 different categories. Individuals could gain points for good deeds like donating to charity and giving blood, and lose points for offences like littering or fighting in public. If your score dropped low enough, you could lose your ability to buy train or plane tickets for up to a year. You could even be publicly named and shamed on a billboard. On the other hand, the program resulted in a couple of crooked local officials being fired, and a sharp decrease in the number of complaints about taxi drivers behaving badly. Pick your poison. The good news is that scoring systems that included punitive elements, like Rongcheng's, were publicly roasted in Chinese state media. As the China Youth Daily put it, quote, "People should have rated government employees, and instead the government has rated the people." And by the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to smash the like button so more people can see it, and hit the subscribe and bell buttons so you don't miss our next upload. Anyway, the central government subsequently banned the use of scoring systems to penalise people. This means that what remains of these local programs is all carrot and no stick. It's more airline loyalty rewards program than George Orwell. So, let's take a closer look. As of 2022, there were at least 62 cities running their own social credit program. All of them were voluntary, and only some of them involved scoring systems. This means that if you live in an area with such a program and you really want the government to give you a score, then you have to go out of your way to ask for it. Rewards for high-scoring participants vary from place to place and include things like access to cheaper public transportation, parking spots, or slight tax reductions. Alternatively, though, you could have the worst score in town and it would be of no consequence. Or, better yet, you could just never volunteer to be a part of such a program. It looks like the latter option is the most popular in China. Participation in these programs has been low, and many people don't even know they exist. A survey by Genia Kostka, professor of Chinese politics at the Freie Universität Berlin, found that only 7% of the respondents were even aware that their local government has a social credit program. The same survey also pointed out that most of the social credit programs in China don't even target individuals. Instead, they're for rating the creditworthiness of government agencies and businesses. As I mentioned earlier, a major focus of the social credit system is improving governance and the business environment in China. That's why most of the central government's efforts have actually gone towards building the corporate social credit system. This much is clear from the government's Credit China website, which provides a window into the big picture of the social credit system. Most of the information on there pertains to businesses and public institutions. This is also borne out in data on enforcement actions carried out under the social credit system. Between the inception of the city pilots in 2014 and 2020, 73% of all enforcement actions were directed at companies. Government institutions were the second biggest target, subject to 13% of enforcement actions. Just 10% of enforcement actions were directed against individuals, and the remainder targeted non-governmental organizations. Now, that doesn't mean that social credit won't grow in importance for the individual. And perhaps the data from 2020 to 2024, which we don't have at the moment, will reveal such a change. But for the time being, the social credit system is mostly for private companies. Now, whether you're a business or an individual, points or no points, the government can still coerce you by putting you on one of its many blacklists that, together with red lists, which is the government's name for whitelists, form a key part of the social credit system. These two are highly fragmented across central and local governments. At the national level, the most important blacklist is the one maintained by the Supreme People's Court. This blacklist is a record of companies and individuals who have been ordered by a court to repay a debt and have the means to do so, but actively refuse to pay. Before the creation of this blacklist, the court didn't actually have any enforcement powers, so it was common for people to just ignore its rulings. Since the creation of the blacklist in 2013, however, it has become a cornerstone of the social credit system and an important tool for the court. Blacklisted debtors are restricted from spending money on luxuries, including plane and high-speed train tickets, star-rated hotels, tuition at expensive private schools, and luxury vehicles. Before being added to the list, the court has to notify the individual or company of its decision and the reason for it. Blacklisted parties can have their names removed from the list and restrictions lifted if they agree to repay their debt and abide by the law in future. Then there are the no-fly and no-ride lists maintained by the Civil Aviation Administration and the National Railway Administration. You can make it onto one of these by assaulting transport staff or other passengers, violating safety regulations, using fake tickets, smoking on board, and so on. The penalty is a 6 to 12-month ban on buying new tickets. Other than this, being on this blacklist does not affect other areas of life or business. Now, whatever you think of the offences and punishments outlined here, it seems that these central government-maintained blacklists are at least standardised with a relatively clear scope and limit. But the same can't be said for blacklists cooked up willy-nilly by some of those pilot cities. Many of them had more than 20 different blacklists and red lists whose composition and focus varied greatly from city to city. For example, in one county in Inner Mongolia, parents who wanted to withdraw their children from local schools with Mandarin language curricula were reportedly threatened with blacklisting. During the pandemic, some cities blacklisted citizens for failing to wear a mask. In the city of Ongqing, a citizen was blacklisted for causing panic by posting a video of an ambulance taking away a suspected pandemic victim. In the city of Zhengzhou, all hospitals that handled pandemic victims were indiscriminately red-listed, meaning that they were deemed exceptionally trustworthy for merely doing what was required of them. In Rongcheng, around 75% of red-listed entities had been listed for doing a good job of paying their taxes. Meanwhile, in Putian, around 75% of red-listed entities had been listed for meeting food safety standards. Now, it appears that Beijing was not happy about any of this because it issued a policy document in 2020 aiming to improve social credit standardization and curtail the excesses of local cadres. The new guidance stated that blacklists must only be used in instances of severe harm and that information security and privacy should be prioritized. It also said that social credit policies should not be applied in areas without broad consensus about their use, that new blacklists should not be created on an ad hoc basis, and that blacklisted entities should have a clear path to credit repair. Now, it's easy to imagine that China's social credit system is just an extension of the surveillance state. For example, they could use AI, big data, and millions of cameras to algorithmically rank citizens and control them with ruthless efficiency. I mean, why wouldn't they? That's the logical conclusion for a control-freak government with access to technologies that make all of this possible at speed and scale. The thing is, though, the evidence doesn't seem to support this conclusion. For a government equipped with a massive surveillance apparatus, you'd be surprised at how low-tech the social credit system is. It seems to involve more fax machines and paperwork than machine learning algorithms. To give you an idea of the digital sophistication of the social credit system, relevant government documents constantly fixate on the basic need to construct databases and platforms and share information. Another theme is inconsistent data formatting, with some cities filing reports as spreadsheets, some as news articles, and some just uploading JPEGs. Data collection in the pilot city programs relied on humans armed with little more than Microsoft Excel and WeChat, and the amount of data collected varied wildly. In Ongqing, 90% of all data recorded under the social credit system came from one department. In Haifei, a city of well over 9 million people, many departments uploaded fewer than 100 pieces of data per week. The social credit system really gives new meaning to big data. That's because inflation is rampant and local cadres have no shortage of incentives to make their data look as big as they please. Eye-catching numbers make your team look good and, might win someone a promotion. Interestingly, the amount of data gathered and the number of people blacklisted seems to be inversely correlated. Anyway, when it comes to digitization, it seems like the state has spent a long time stumbling at the first hurdle. This is likely due to the lack of unified standards or a central repository for data storage, unclear definitions of different types of credit, and regional and institutional differences in collected data. So it's no surprise then that Beijing has put an emphasis on standardization and digitization in recent years. But if that makes you think, oh no, that just means they can repress people more efficiently, then it's worth considering that this fragmented, messy, and low-tech implementation of the social credit system has caused many of its worst outcomes so far. From wanton blacklisting of people who don't deserve it, to the most controversial instances of behavioral data collection and scoring in pilot cities, in each case it has been Beijing that intervened to curtail the excesses of local governments run amok. Now listen, this isn't to say Beijing is the good cop in all of this. We'll get to that in a moment. But it looks like the social credit system is really here to stay, and if that's the case, then standardizing and digitizing its implementation so that it isn't such a mess anymore, well, that may not be the worst move. And for those of us worried about a techno-dystopia, we can at least be glad that the central government is wary of the dangers of automated decision-making. That much is clear from a 2021 revision to the Administrative Penalties Law that states that digitally collected evidence should require human evaluation. And as of 2023, almost all social credit-related decisions were reportedly being made by humans, not AI. And speaking of AI, in November 2021, China pledged to never use AI systems for social scoring purposes when it signed the UN's Recommendations on the Ethics of AI document. That sounds encouraging, but we're not sure how to feel about it because in the same document, China also agreed to never use AI for mass surveillance. And, well, who's going to tell the UN? Speaking in 2018, then US Vice President Mike Pence conflated the social credit system with China's surveillance state, calling it, quote, an Orwellian system premised on controlling virtually every facet of human life. In reality, it's a public, relatively transparent, and increasingly curtailed campaign of moralizing that is quite separate. It might not be benign, but it's also not nearly as sexy as he makes it sound. The largely fictional social credit superscore in particular has often been invoked as a metaphor for a techno-dystopian future. Eventually, it became a meme, and then it became the only version of the truth that anyone cares to remember. In fact, it's not hard to find posts on Chinese social media mocking people who uncritically believe that such a system is already in place. On Weibo, for example, you can find shitposters making mock-ups of a China's social credit app showing scores like 726, second-class citizen, you are being watched, 0, turn yourself in, and 276, to be executed immediately. Now, it's unfortunate that the social credit system has commanded so much mindshare. That's because China, like so many other governments around the world, has many much sharper tools for mass surveillance, counterinsurgency, counter-subversion, political repression, and social control that often operate covertly and outside the confines of laws and regulations. Most of us have heard of China's social credit system, but how many of us have heard of Project Sharp Eyes, or Golden Shield, or the Integrated Joint Operations Platform? How about Skynet? Now, if you clicked on this video hoping to give yourself nightmares, then just go and Google any one of those and, well, you're ready to rock. There's no shortage of state crimes against freedom and privacy that take place every day in China and all over the world. Most of them just aren't as memeable, though, as the idea of social credit. But we would do well to treat all of them with enough diligence that we can correctly identify them, who they affect, and how they came about. After all, if we're not able to think critically and look past the memes, we might just be ideal prey for a dystopian surveillance state of our own. And that's all for today's video, folks, so if you learned something new, then don't forget to drop us a like. If you have a hotter take on the social credit system than us, then let us know about it in the comments. And make sure you hit subscribe and hit the bell button, or else we'll report you to the feds and you'll get docked 25 points. Just kidding. As always, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. This is Guy, signing off.